Howdy, everyone. We are trying something new today. So, I'm Ariel. I have a guest. And today we're going to be talking about subscription, but that's going to happen in a few minutes, as you can see on the counter here. So, before we get started, you know how usually I ask, what's in your cup? I have Earl Grey tea in my App Figures mug, which I always hold backwards. Tell me what you're drinking, where you're from, put all that into the chat, and let's talk before the show begins, because today we're going to be talking about subscriptions, and I want to use as much time as we can to just talk subscriptions. And if you have any questions, of course, put them in the chat. That should be not even a question. I'm going to bring the best comments into the show once we get started. So we have about 2 minutes. Tell me what you're drinking, where you're from. I am very curious. I'm always very curious. And I just need to make sure that I can see the chat. It's a whole different thing. Now I'm in the chat. Only a few seconds left. The countdown is such a good addition, but at the same time, it also always reminds me that it's going to start, it's going to start, it's going to start, it's going to start. You're watching the backstage view now, so if you're not sure why I'm talking as if no one can hear me, it's because, well, you can all hear me, so it's fine. All right, we are about to get started, so I think it's time. Let's get started. Ta-da! We're on. What's today? Happy Thursday. We're doing this at a slightly different time and a slightly different day, so I'm still trying to acclimate to what's happening. But today we have a pretty good show, we have a pretty good guest, and we have a pretty good topic. All those together, I think, are going to make for a really cool topic, cool discussion, I should say. As I was saying before, if you have any questions, throw them into the chat, and I'm going to bring good questions up on the screen, and we'll try to answer them. So let's get started. Today's topic is subscription, something I have been talking a lot about before, but not really on live streams yet. And that's because I was talking about ASO for the most part. And if you missed any of those, there's a link in the description to find them. But let's talk about subscriptions. And I have a guest for you today. Fouad from the App Growth Network is joining me. Thank you for joining me today. This has been in the making for a while.
Hi, Ariel. Thanks for inviting me today to your show.
Of course. And we have kind of a bunch of different topics that we want to talk about within subscriptions. But before we get into that, can you introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit more about what you've done, what you do, and what makes you so knowledgeable about subscriptions.
Yeah, thanks, Ariel. So my name is Fouad Saeidi. I'm the founder and CEO of App Growth Network. We are a growth agency headquartered in Vancouver, Canada. I have a decade of experience in mobile app marketing, different topics from organic to paid. The App Growth Network does, and App Growth Network has been around for around 4 years. We focus on product marketing approach for apps. Our difference comes from the fact that we touch apps pulse, and we focus on acquisition and retention as a whole, the really holistic life cycle approach. We have 30 people working at App Growth Network, and I think we've touched 150 app projects so far in the past 4 years.
Oh, wow. That is a lot, especially these days. We were just talking before the show started about how it's kind of becoming the time for subscription and for really monetizing, whether it's on Google Play or on the App Store, whether it's games or apps, like everything now is slowly shifting towards how do I make more money with subscriptions? How do I make money with subscriptions? And that's kind of the topic of this. But jumping right into it, I do think that almost every app can fit a subscription model, but not every app and not every game. How would you, if someone came to you and said, here's my app or here's my game, can I use subscriptions? How would you determine what's good and what's where to say, no, this doesn't really fit?
Yeah, that's a good question. As you mentioned, while it's possible for every app to have that element, there are some that are suited better and not. I think the apps that you need recurring habits formed in certain genres are better suited for it. So our top, for example, examples are health and fitness, medical, fintech, finance. You know, if you need to check your like wealth in the day-to-day basis, content apps, like you look at this streaming, they're really good kind of candidates for this. And the not suitable part, I think, for example, games, they're single purchase. They're better like suited for that, or a calculator. For example, it depends on who you are as your profession, right? So the in-app purchase might be better, for example, angle for some of those, or like shopping, e-commerce. Again, those ones are, unless you see a long-term value for them for per subscription for like discounts and promotions, like Uber model, for example, right?
Yeah.
So those are, for example, really beneficial for subscription.
That makes a ton of sense. So I think essentially it kind of sounds like you're saying almost every app fits a subscription model because the e-commerces are kind of obvious that they don't fit. And even
Right.
those in a way do with something like Amazon Prime if you think about it. So there's really no end to what you can do. And I think that's really what's so exciting about this is the fact that it's very difficult not to be able to leverage something like a subscription model. And a subscription model is so strong these days that it's the way to go. I know that a few years ago
Yeah.
when subscriptions first came out, a few of my developer friends asked me, what do you think would happen? Are people going to pay for this? And I said, not immediately, but give it a year. In a year, we'll see that people are actually getting used to the subscription model. But before, they're going to hate it. They're going to say, why do I need subscriptions? I used to pay one time. And now that's, I think a few years now in, that's what I'm seeing a lot of, especially from developers who had a paid model and switched to subscriptions. Do you see the same on your end?
Absolutely. I think that is the way to go now. To conquer and win a subscription is not easy. So when you think about, like we talked about, let's say, maybe Amazon is because it's a big brand, right? But like in terms of food delivery, you think about Uber, DoorDash, like, Instacart, different options out there for people, right? So all of them could have a subscription element to it, but I don't think you would be paying to subscribe to all of them.
Yeah.
Like, eventually one of these brands win it over the other, and once they win it, there's going to be a big LTV behind that, right? So and a lot goes to why someone over the other one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of, in a way, the name of the game these days. It's you want that land grab. You can see that in streaming services, and you can see that in how they're just giving discounts left and right and putting new content on and getting sued because they just want to have that sort of subscription locked in. Because once you subscribe, it's so much more difficult to say no, especially if you didn't subscribe and unsubscribe immediately for that free trial. So that makes a lot of sense. And that's really essentially why we're here, because if really most apps can opt into this model that pays you on its own in a way, horizontal revenue, as someone told me many, many years ago, why not do it? Right.
Yeah.
And And I think that's a healthy starting point. What would you say when you start thinking about a subscription app, whether it's a new app or transitioning from an existing app? What are the first things that you would think about, things to consider when you start thinking about setting it up?
I think it depends on whether it's new or existing. It doesn't matter in the world of subscription. It all depends on the genre. I mean, content and service apps, for example, they work better in subscription model because they offer digital content, right? When it comes to new apps, implementing a subscription has advantages, providing reliable source of income, generating revenue. The downside unique to using a subscription model for new app is that you need to be continuously providing new features and content to users.
Mm-hmm.
This generation of content ideas should not be a difficult task for a new app, but the problem comes with the implementation of these ideas. Since a new app, they're still finding and discovering their unique, selling point and the value proposition, right? So the ideas are a gamble. Some could work and some couldn't, which might be a turnoff for some users who feel they're not getting their money's worth due to fluctuations and changes to the app, right?
Yeah. For
pivoting in existing apps to a subscription-based model also has similar advantages, but also pivoting to this model, there's bound to be potential backlash from users. When launching an app with a subscription model, users know what to expect and what they're getting into, but making this transition from a possible one-time fee to recurring fee, so you have to really explain the value prop. The backlash comes mostly from existing users who feel wronged from this change and might eventually change their, change perspective on the app compared to before. So it's a little bit risky move, right? But to me, I think the key point, Ariel, is habit formation. That's the topic that is I always constantly talk about. For health and fitness, for example, if you were able to get people to use the app 7 days in health and fitness every day, then we can win them.
Absolutely.
It's a challenge, but once you do it, I think that's done.
I completely agree. I think it's funny that you mention fitness, health and fitness, because we had someone from Adidas or Reebok, Adidas. I want to say Adidas on the show last year, and we talked specifically about not only how do you bring them to use the app, but how do you get them to form that sort of habit? And based on how they end up using it, you have different types of habits. You have the once a week habit, the once a day habit, and you really want to optimize for those. And it's interesting because you would do the same thing for subscriptions as you would for regular usage. And that's, I think that's a positive when how you want your users to be aligned with how you make money. It's kind of a win-win the way I see it. Now,
and also offering a single versus multiple tiers. So if it's subscription,
yep.
Sometimes, a single tier, and whereas annually versus monthly versus quarterly versus, there's
actually a question just about that. And Thomas is saying that AppFigure started with one level of subscription in the early days because of limited features. And now with many features, there are many levels. Should a new service copy this sort of progression? And I think it really depends. You were just bringing up tiers, and I think it really depends on how your subscription or how your service works. Let's see if I can bring this up on screen. Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
So what would you say to starting with slow and growing versus starting with all the tiers up front? What makes more sense?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I think starting with very simple, a simple one-time, month-to-month kind of, obviously a lot of them have free trials these days, right? You get a user to actually try as many features as possible, because you want to actually show what your product is. You want to be honest and transparent about everything.
Yeah.
Right. Not that you have a lot of different things, but you have to pay more and more and more. Well, show me what you've got, right?
Yeah.
That transparency, I think, is key to get them with the least amount of money to commit to the first transaction. right?
Okay.
And as they do, and they see the benefit of that, now that benefits are taken away because you hit the paywall,
Hmm.
right? And now, well, would you like X and Y bundle of this? And let them choose. I think at that progression, to allow them to choose and opt in and opt out to see some features or benefit to them, and obviously having enough content to support that, right?
Yeah, I think that's really the name of the game when you think about it. It's really about what you can offer. So, just speaking from my personal experience, for those of you who don't know, we started in 2009. So, we're about 13 years old. We'll be 13 in a few weeks. And when we started, we had the two tiers, a very simple pricing page, $4.99 a month or nothing a month, and you could use our platform. And back in the day, the idea was the features were so necessary that we wanted everyone to have access to them, whether you're Google or Facebook, or you just started out in your garage or basement and you're just trying to ride this wave of apps and whatever that means. And over time, we added more tracking and rank tracking came in. And then we enabled hourly rank tracking and reviews and ratings and reply to reviews and App Store optimization tools. And that brings different tiers. And then competitive intelligence and market intelligence and SDK intelligence. And I can go on and on and on. But the idea was that if for us, we spent maybe a year thinking about our pricing before we introduced new tiers. And we said what would be useful to our members. And what was useful the most was the use cases. So we built every plan around the use case. And so we tried to name them also appropriately. So we have a plan called Connect, and it's $10 a month or $9.99. And the idea is you get to connect all your different data sources. So your various ad networks for ad revenue, and your various ad networks for ad spend, and your App Store, and your Google Play, and your Amazon, and your Windows. So the idea is that you can have everything in a single place. Saves you a ton of time for $10. And you're connecting. So that was kind of the idea. And then we go all the way up to Grow, where Grow is the plan where we say, you want to grow, you need to have ASL tools, you need to have competitive intelligence, otherwise you can't grow. Maybe you will grow, if you do things and you accidentally stumble on something awesome. So that's how I would respond to this question is think about the kind of use cases you have, and those use cases tie into pricing. And I actually had a question specifically about free trials, which I think works with this, and that is, one, is a free trial a necessity these days? Because it wasn't 2 or 3 years ago when subscription started. And if so, how do you go about knowing what to give in a free trial and how long a free trial should be? And how do you come up with the parameters for something like this?
That's a really good question, Ariel. It really depends on the nature of the app. Like they had this research, I think it was Amplitude or someone that did this research. They had that. I was in a workshop. It was Calm, or one of those meditation app. They did some research that you need actually 7 days to actually fully try this every day, one every day so okay, so if you get someone to try this for 7 days, then every day we kind of offer some rewards and badges or some sort of reminders, then you've completed what you need enough to now hit a paywall. Whereas for an invoicing app, who's going to invoice every day? You're going to look at your invoices twice a week, for example, right? So you might need a longer duration. So maybe a 14 to 30 day kind of window for an invoicing app, right? So, and for a delivery app, again, do people shop every day, right? So maybe you need longer period. A one-time trial may or may not be enough for people to explore the whole experience, because you might just order something with Instacart tomorrow and then that is done, but then you might want something longer. So actually, well, I've done it twice and I've got enough value for it. So I think there's no or you look at example, something like Bumble. You could actually have a lifetime subscription to Bumble. Like you had free trial for a while, but now Bumble becomes a lifestyle brand. It's beyond dating, because you do Bumble Bees and you do friendship and networking, and it kind of. So once that is sticky enough, then people go for longer periods. So again, typically 7 to 14 is what a lot of apps are offering out there. Obviously, if it's too long, that has its own problems. If it is too short, that has its own problems. So it's a sweet spot. I think 7 to 14 is what they're using these days.
I totally agree. I experimented with this a ton. So we tried a 7-day trial, a 14-day trial, a 30-day trial, a 20-day trial, really anything in the realm of that. Up to a month. We didn't do more than a month because that sounds kind of crazy. And it gives you benefits, especially now that you will be able to communicate with those users that are in trial, at least on the Apple side directly and like legally directly. And I know from my experience on the web, we could always do it. It gives you more opportunities to engage them, but at the same time, you need to make sure that they constantly come back. And if you don't have that kind of engagement mechanism, the length of the trial makes it very different. But we jumped right into what a good trial is. Does that mean that a trial is a necessity these days?
I think a trial is a necessity these days.
Okay.
However, you got to watch for signals for purchase and preempt that ahead of time. So see who is using more. There's a lot of strategies to go with conversion, right? You could do dynamic price testing these days. You could do signal testing these days to focus on like purchase optimization, right? There's a lot of things for people to watch those kind of early and then really like figure out, okay, these guys are going to purchase. What am I going to offer to them when? What kind of prompts to even get them before the paywall?
That's I think now we're getting super advanced though, if you think about that level of progression, because in my experience, many developers who dive into subscriptions as a main focus for making money, it's always very slowly. And subscriptions, that there's just a lot going on. You have to think about active subscribers and users in trial and conversions and churn and MRR and ARR and all these different things to make money. And we'll talk about metrics in a little bit, because I think it's very critical to kind of throw away all the noise and just focus on one or two important things. But it does make sense that you would want to optimize for basically everything. You want to know what they're doing and try to really act on that. But if you had to slim it down and say someone who may not have that sort of hands-on control of their subscription, maybe they're just getting started, or maybe they're not really going full-time in it just yet, they're trying to understand if it works, how would you structure maybe a very simple trial for an app? Or how would you go about, what kind of questions would you ask? Because I know every app is just a little bit different.
Yeah, I think you would have a call to action. You would be basically a good personal onboarding kind of experience, right? You'll have all of that. Ensuring that the details of the subscription are clear. There's nothing shady going on there. A powerful customer value proposition, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And creating scarcity and urgency. I think that is also important for people to realize that I gotta make a decision. I gotta, you know, I gotta be decisive on this. Something is gonna happen. I may not get a report. I may not get a health score when it comes to a medical app or health app, or I may not get my access to my stocks if they're, or a fintech experience, right? Or my finances or my invoices are going to be late, right? How do you create that emotional, psychological kind of tone with them that is basically touching their hot buttons?
That makes really a ton of sense. And I think that is also simple enough that whether you are a really seasoned marketer or just starting out with this, if you know your app well enough, you would know how to make that sort of connection in a way. And you mentioned fintech, and I know you released an ebook or a guide on marketing for business and fintech apps, which is pretty good. I would highly recommend giving it a read if you're in that space. There's going to be a link to it in the description. So make sure to check that out if you are in the fintech or business segments. Now, there are a few interesting questions in the chat. They're both very long, so I'm not sure if they're going to fit on the screen, but let's give that a try and see what happens. Yeah, it definitely does not fit on the screen. Not well, at least. We'll try to see what happens. So Thomas continues with asking questions relating to trials. And let's see if we can see it. What about instead of free trial per user, what if there is a free version until a certain number of users hit, or for the first year? The users think that you're trying to pull a fast one in that style. And if I understand this question correctly, it means that how do you kind of build momentum, initial momentum, and do you maybe not worry about a subscription model and only go with free until you have enough traction? How would you go about something like that? Meaning a kind of a revenue model for day one, or a growth model and then a revenue model?
That's a really good question, Ariel. I think that depends on an organization's ability to sustain and continue. I'm assuming an environment like that, they're venture backed, and there are products out there that are absolutely free, but they collect data, and that data means something to some other people. Where health data, financial data, medical data. If that is their model, let it be free forever, right? Because that data could be monetized, right? So it depends on how much can you, because we know apps are not going to make money from day one. My philosophy is crawling before walking, right? For the most important KPIs are retention day 1 and 7 for an app that is actually being launched in subscription. You care about that the most in terms of revenue. Because if you're retaining users, you can get them to actually use it till day 7. You're winning after 3 to 6 months that you're launching an app for a new app, because money will come later. Trust me, money will come later. You'll find a way to monetize that usage, right? Either in forms of data, either in forms of immediate one-time transaction or subscription. That traffic means something to someone.
Absolutely. I think my view on this is maybe controversial, but very, very different. I believe that everything you start as a business venture needs to be considered as a business venture. So if you are saying strategically, I want to offer a free service so I can have my pricing model later just for growth, I think that's great, but you have to know what that subscription model will look like, what sort of tier system you will have. It doesn't have to be very specifically the way to do it, but it needs to be very precise, meaning you need to know what you're going to go with. So if someone comes to you and says, well, I see now you're free because you're probably trying to get momentum, how much is it going to cost when you need it in a year or in 6 months? And I know you may not want to answer that question right up front because you may not know, or there are a lot of circumstances, but you need to have an idea of what you're going to be selling. And you brought up a good point. Sometimes the thing you sell ends up not being the thing you actually give to users. Data is one of them. And that's something that I care about a lot because we made the decision not to do that years and years ago. And when investors came to us and said, we'll pay you so you don't charge businesses and then give us the data, and we said, no, we're going to give tools that align us with our users. And that's, again, one of those decisions that there is no right or wrong. If you look at our competitors, some of them don't do that and they sell all the data, and that works for them. So I think ultimately it's really how you want to run your company. And like you were saying before, it depends on what you can sustain. So there's a lot to do with that.
It's a good point. It's a good point. And I think our marketing the app business since 2020 has matured up so much that people expect to pay in some form. Either they pay by watching an ad, or they're paying for subscription, or they're realizing if something is free, there's a catch to it. Like Facebook is free to use, but then look, everything that you put on Facebook is used against you for advertising. It's free, right? It's free to use. Instagram is free to use, right? But you're being watched ads day and night, right? So using those platforms, so so those, I think today's users understand if something is absolutely free, there's something somewhere else that needs to be compensated. Are they comfortable with that?
And I think that's going to be a debate that continues for a long time, because then once we get into data specifically, because then the question is, do they know that that this data is kind of being used against them? And I can talk about this for days. Maybe this is a topic for a different live stream where we talk about app tracking transparency and the impact on the market and why we even got here, because I think Facebook made this happen. It's really all because of Facebook. They just they flew too close to the sun. It was completely unnecessary. But you get into these questions. But if now it's so much more different than it was 10 or 15 years ago, or when we started, because you have all these different use cases that you can look at and say, okay, so Facebook started for free and look at them now. Other companies started with a revenue model, look at them now. And you have all these different ways of evaluating how what you have can work with what you want. So for example, one of my favorite tools is Dropbox. And you can see the Dropbox's business model, which stretches from the person who has no idea what Dropbox is all the way up to enterprises. It's so tight and it's so refined at this point. And when it started, it was also pretty good, but not as good as it is now. And I think that's something we can easily learn from. I love learning from competitors or from the market in general, so I don't have to make those mistakes again. And that's a really easy way to do that. So I completely agree. Now, there are two questions in the chat that I thought were almost the same and pretty interesting. And both are asking something along the lines of, let's see. So Zulfi is asking, I have an existing app with, let's see if I can bring this on screen so I don't have to just read it. I have an existing app with a high one-time in-app purchase. Oh, $75. Wow. Okay, that's very high. And I'm considering switching to subscription. Any tips on how to handle this? Should I keep the in-app purchase around or go all in? And then there is another question from Jeff, who's asking, when moving from an in-app purchase to unlock all features to a subscription, should existing users be grandfathered into and retaining the features forever? 1 year, not at all, or any other approach? So these two questions kind of align, and we can talk about that for a while. But what do you think about switching from something that works into something that could potentially work better?
I think in today's world, you have tools and intelligence that allows you to do both. So there are A/B testing tools out there like Leanplum, for example. These guys get this and the other guys get this version. You could try it out for some users to see how that works, right? Like they get different kind of, again, dynamic. You can do dynamic price testing out there. There's no right and wrong answer for these things, but also I think customer loyalty needs to mean something. You can't just suddenly say, well, you're no longer getting this, because you could hurt your social, you could hurt your reviews, your rankings. So you gotta gradually introduce, offer value, and just say, well, you're not getting this with this grandpa package, right? These things are new things that it wasn't part of what it was before. And today, if you opt into this, not only get what you're getting, but you get these extra ones, so they can basically move them to next tier. So I think, yes, those guys, and you also look at LTV of people who've been with you for a while. It means something, right? The fact that they've brought more people, the fact that they've helped you with your social, the fact that they activated a lot of ratings, reviews, your ASO. So it is part of that equation as well of monetizing those users. When you do the math, these guys actually have higher value for you. So kind of be cautious of how you're introducing prices to them. Fine.
Absolutely.
So that.
I think that the really.
And about this, about the $75 purchase thing to move to subscription again, I think just test it. What do you think, Ariel?
I think you hit the nail right on the head. The idea that you can use just your gut to make this decision and win every time you do it, I think that's a mistake. Really, what I've seen is it's tough because starting at the top with a single in-app purchase for $75, that's a seriously high in-app purchase from everything I've seen and I know. And if you make enough money with that, I would say maybe keep it and try, like you were saying, experiment very small and then eventually grow from there, because you have something that could be substantially worse if you don't. 75 is just so high that I think it's a tough one to just replace. But I think what I've seen is, which I would in a way call a mistake from developers, is they have this great idea. We're going to transition to subscriptions and we're going to have this big, massive, we'll tell everyone, we're going to scream, we're now subscriptions. And it's going to be a huge update and everyone's going to know about it. And the reality of it is that your first type of subscription offer may not be the right one. It may be if you do a really good job and, like you were saying, use the tools. We have competitive intelligence tools that are affordable specifically so everyone can go in and see this app transition to subscriptions. Let's look at how revenue changed over time. Those are estimates, and they're really good estimates, so they would give you an idea of whether this app is growing, it's shrinking. And you brought up Bumble before, which I thought was really interesting, because they had an interesting shift at the end of last year in December. They switched, I think they gated some of the filters in the app, and the free users who were using those filters really hated that move. And not only that, their weekly, I believe their weekly in-app purchase is somewhere in the $40 range or something along those lines, which is high. I think, at least. I'm not a user,
Why
so
not just buy the annual or lifetime user reduces for something and moving to a different category of product, they became a lifestyle. If you're single today, well,
exactly.
again, chances you might be single, you're in a relationship, but you use networking for some other reasons, then yeah, well, buy this for now. You got a $200
Yep.
lifetime purchase instead of like the 40 weekly, right? So, but you're giving them options. They're making those choices, not you making them for them.
Exactly. And I think that's the key here. So there's so many different ways to look at it. I'm pretty sure the move was a great way to push people to specifically that annual. But the idea behind the annual is not just more money, because if you look at $40 a week is just, in my opinion, insane. And you could see, I read a bunch of reviews. They had thousands and thousands of negative reviews, which is something I covered in my newsletter a few weeks ago. And people hated it, obviously. Some people paid for it. So you have to find that balance between will they pay for it, or you have to see how this would impact how that would have an impact on the brand itself. Because if you end up subscribing to something with an annual or something longer, like, well, I paid for it, I might as well just use it. And that's one of those things that change how people feel about your brand. And so I think a lot of it has to come from understanding what's the market like. So in the case of the $75 subscription, I don't know exactly what the app is. I don't think that's in the comments, but whatever it is, there are probably competitors who are in that space, or at least apps that are similar enough that you can look at their trends and see, well, this one is a subscription app, makes that much money, and this one is a paid app, makes this much money. I can now extract what would happen to my app based on downloads and trying to understand the conversion rate and looking at ratings and reviews. And in my experience, I've yet to see anyone who switched from a paid model to a subscription model fail with it. I have not talked to that many people, hundreds, I would say. So I feel confident enough saying that, probably more than hundreds, that it's all about how you do it, but the transition itself is a positive. So back to $75 in-app purchase. I think the idea would be first look at the market, see what's out there, see if they're using subscriptions and how and what sort of revenue they're making based on downloads, and then experiment, like you were saying, with either only giving some users the ability to subscribe or turning on a subscription model for everyone, but not going full out with a press release and everything else. So not transitioning, but experimenting with it.
Well, 75 may or may not be a high or low number. It depends who the audience is.
Very true.
If your app is subscription for entrepreneurs and they're getting access to some, networks of, exclusive networks, or if an app, medical app for doctors that they're using, $75 might be nothing, right?
True.
So we need to really know what market are we talking about and how is that relevant to other people, and giving people choices. I think when we talk about KPIs for subscription, it makes it easier that the fact that you actually have a lot more in a subscription economy compared to single app purchase economy.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes a ton of sense. And bringing it to the question that we have on the screen, the second part of this is when it comes to pricing, in my experience, I used to shy away from pricing changes when we first started with App Figures, because changing the price on someone who already uses your platform sounds like a terrible idea. And also changing it for someone who might be using your platform but might have heard about it from a friend, and now the friend knows it's $5, and now you're trying to charge $9, and it becomes difficult. So for many years, I didn't do any sort of price testing. And at some point I realized that if we continue with that, we'll really just be underselling ourselves, because we keep making changes to the platform, improvements and enhancements, and we don't really have a good way of knowing what people are willing to pay for it. And so when we started testing, we said that every time so all existing users will always be grandfathered into whatever they already have, features and pricing. And that if anyone comes in and says, well, last week I saw it at this price, can you keep it? If it makes sense, we'll do it. So we usually do it for the first week or two of any sort of price change. And since we have changed significantly, so we have moved from, we've gone through maybe 10 or 15 different big pricing, strategic pricing shifts over the years. And then we recently introduced new pricing when we added more features. And all of that was with keeping people who are on their existing plan grandfathered. And I think that made it all very, very smooth. We have not had that many people who are trying to get plans for less, plans for more, or complaining. And when they do, we explain that we're trying to maximize how much money we're making. That's pretty normal. So that's how we've gone about it. And I would recommend doing the same thing. And again, it goes back to what you were saying before, Fred, is that you have to really understand your own economics to know what can you sustain. So if you really underprice yourself and instead of $10 a month, you charged one because you wanted to get people to subscribe and now you can't pay the bills, that's kind of a problem. But if that's not the case, then you can easily grandfather them. That's kind of how I would go about this.
Well, Ariel, this is another thing that I recently, we had a strategy session with a few people. There is this health mindfulness app that's got grown to a certain number by social through influencer kind of like networks and everything, and now they want to grow by 30% more. And a colleague recommended, well, why don't we introduce this to students? And I said, will students pay money compared to right now their target is entrepreneur network? It's like, well, possibly, maybe not, but how much would they activate on social and reviews and referrals? So a student might pay $2, right? Compared to somebody who's paying $10. Can they have access to some limited features of this app? But a student could bring 10 people, they could leave 10 reviews compared to someone else who's busy. And your ranking in App Store might go higher so that you capture other people that they're actually searching for your app in certain genre. So there might be a value per different. So if you segment your users, then you realize there might be a value for each user, a different kind of like, if you know the audience, the persona, there might be an audience persona there that you can actually get to sell cheaper, but also those guys add to your product economics or the whole ecosystem's economics as a whole.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that might feel a little bit more advanced. And I know that, again, what I was saying before with subscriptions, it tends to feel overwhelming very quickly. But honestly, it really isn't. It's one of those things where once you get your bearings and you understand that with a paid app, you have kind of one metric: how many downloads converted to how many, or how many in-app purchases converted to how much money I'm going to have in my pocket at the end of the day. And whether it's consumable or non-consumable doesn't really make a big difference, because that's up to the user to make that decision of whether they want to give you money or not. It's the same with paid apps. But with subscriptions, it's up to the user once, until they cancel, of course. Mm-hmm. So they will continue to pay, and you have to wrap your head around what is a cancellation, and when do they cancel, and why would they cancel, and what is even the right amount of subscription period to give. Do I need a 1 week, or do I need a 1 week subscription and a 1 month and a 1 year, or do I need a 1 year and that's it? And you really have to know your users at that point. Have you seen any sort of like rules of thumb for approaching these sort of things? When you have no prior knowledge, how do you structure the different periods of subscription that you have?
I think you really need to do a good market research and competitor analysis.
Yeah.
Remember, your users are not only, they're going to subscribe to only one at the end. If, like, for example, for my kid, she likes, for example, drawing, right? Coloring, like kids coloring. I've tried 4 or 5 different ones at the same time. And at the end, I've chose one because she doesn't need 5 different ones, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm pretty sure, I mean, people are probably, I don't know if people dating with one app or they have 2, 3 different preferred dating app. At the end, they probably subscribe to one or something like that. So evaluate competition really, really well. I think that's a rule of thumb. Like, you just go and see who your top 3 to 5 are and explore different options of subscription. I mean, 7, 14, who knows? It's all testing, right?
Yeah.
And you know, like, there is, and also the genre best practices. We talked about this before.
Yep. I think that always makes sense. You really have to know your audience, and that's kind of the answer to everything in our space. I actually, for those of you who don't know, I did an interview with the App Growth Network a few weeks ago, and I think that went live last week on their podcast, which you should definitely go and listen to. I talked about App Store optimization and subscription optimization and really everything optimization. And we're going to have a link to that in the description as well, if we don't already. And the idea is that every time you want to optimize or improve or grow or really anything beyond just I launched an app and I let it go. You really have to understand what's around you, which is exactly why we built our competitor intelligence, something we've been working on for a long time. We shipped last year, and we have so many users who are now using it to understand what's out there. And some of them use it on an ongoing basis just to keep tabs on what their competitors are doing and seeing if those changes actually impact revenue and downloads, whether it's on the ASO side with optimizing keywords or screenshots or icons, or whether it's on the subscription side and how it impacts revenue. And there are some who just do research before they launch. There's some who do research before they even start developing the app or game, which is my preferred way of using intelligence before you make any sort of real implementation decisions. But really, that's the name of the game. You have to know what's going on. If you guess, your competitors are not. And data is usually stronger than gut. I say this in my newsletter all the time when we look at App Store optimization, because the same sort of mindset really continues, especially around keywords and keyword optimization. So that,
and
to
App
me,
Store optimization, Ariel, these days is the entire app optimization. I'll tell you why.
Yep.
Especially with Apple introducing the custom dynamic listing, the product page listing. It's basically your that's the landing page you're sending people to.
Mm-hmm.
It's about your value prop. It's about your ratings and reviews. That tells you about your product health. If you have crashes, the app is buggy, and all that, it is no longer about metadata, which it was in 2014, the era of Flappy Bird, right? That's what it was, right?
Yep.
A lot of people. But today's world is all about app size, about your sentiment, millions of different factors goes to App Store optimization. Google and Apple have refined that years over years over years. So you got to take that seriously. A lot of people, clients come to us and like, well, I don't need ASO. I'm like, what is your understanding of ASO? Do you think it's just to put a few keywords or update your description and you're going to rank well? That helps if the other things are in place.
Mm-hmm.
They look at your uninstall ratio, right? Now with A/B testing features in Apple, you can do lots and lots of new things. So you got to leverage all of that. And that leads to a better subscription optimization. It's the full life cycle approach. That even that's our philosophy in App Growth Network as well. Like some clients, they come to us, they want to spend more money on ads. We tell them, no, your retention day 7 sucks.
Yeah,
go fix that first.
Yeah, that's something you wouldn't hear from a lot of people who just want to focus on one thing. But it's the same, and I see it the same from the optimization, just the optimization side. It's it's the starting point these days. And we can talk about how Apple search ads is good for downloads, but at the same time, Apple search ads are getting so expensive because of app tracking transparency that so many companies, big, small, and really everything in the middle, are transitioning to organic, which is App Store optimization. And if you don't start right and don't continue right and don't end right, you're just going to be not as competitive. And if we all existed in our own silos and every app did not have any competition, it would have been fine. But really, when you think about it, every app has competition. And if the competition is doing more than you, then they will likely win. And I know so many developers who come to me and say, I didn't change anything in my app. I used to be number one for my keyword. I used to have a conversion rate of a high percentage conversion rate. And that's all gone. The App Store is broken. It's all bad. Apple ruined everything. And really what it is, that's not at all true. I mean, the part about them losing downloads is very true, but everything else is because competition picked up the pace. When they were ranking number one, maybe no one else tried, or the ones who tried just didn't do it right. And now, because tools are becoming so much more accessible, we released our ASO tools, suite of tools a couple of years ago, and we have so many different tiers that wherever you are in the process, you can really affordably get into it. And we give you so much insight that to not do App Store optimization, even minimally these days, is kind of rare. And so if you have a little bit of insight, you are now doing better than someone who has no insight. And so if you're the one with no insight in your competitive niche, you're out of luck.
Ariel, I could add to that. As an agency who is working with almost 20, 30 projects at the same time at any given time, we see the ones that are getting an edge compared to the others. We are partnered up with 20, 25 tools. in subscription space, the revenue cats, the adjust, lean plum, braze, like app figures, one signal, all these grades, like all of them look into engagement, retention, analytics, funnels. We have access to, we see data, this guy compared to the other guy, because they give us access as an agency, obviously we're under NDAs,
Yeah.
but we use data directionally. The ones that are succeeding are the ones that they're constantly testing, come up with hypothesis, get a cohort of 1,000 users, 2,000 users per hypothesis, prove them right or wrong, document those hypotheses, and they win. It's about gaining 5% edge and gain in 20 different things in the funnel that may move the needle, from app store to download revenue conversion, from download to registration, to passing your tutorial, to retention day 1 to 7 to 14, to paywall to post that. And then every single stage needs a marketing strategy and tactic. You do retargeting, you do subscription retention, you got like, you get to even do predictive modeling. Who are these people that are going to be churning? Or are we going to email these people ahead of time? Are they price sensitive? Do you ask them the right questions? Do you actually run surveys with people to know if they're happy or not? Are they using other products? If you're not doing anything, you're sitting back like what you used to do. And guess what? More apps are coming to the marketplace. They come up with new, different. I mean, I'm not a tech developer, but I know that the codes are changing as well. What used to be good, now there's different ways of writing a code that is more advanced, that is on Unity, that is more polished, and they come with a clean UI. Chances are that they've already evaluated your app, and they're building something better than you have.
Exactly. And I think that's one of those important things that everyone has to keep in mind is everyone is moving forward. Whether it's their optimization or their UI or their ability to get free users to become paying users or their ability to show up in search results, it's really all about that. And by the way, if anyone has questions about App Store optimization, I have another live stream next week where I will be answering all those questions live. Someone on Twitter said that answering App Store optimization questions live makes me brave, so thank you. But I don't think that's true. It's just a matter of looking at a lot of data, going back to data. So in any case, there's a link in the description for that as well. Obviously, a lot of links in the description, so please check it out when we're done here. And you can get all those good things. Now, one thing that I really want to talk about, and that's something that I get asked all the time, is what do you look at when you have a subscription app? Which metrics should you actually care about? Which should you look at every day? Which should you look at every week? And that comes as a question because there's just so many. On our platform,
Yeah, there's so many.
We give you the ability to track all of those metrics. We even go a layer deeper than what Apple and Google give you, many layers deeper than Google, but even deeper than Apple, by introducing things like churn and things like MRR, monthly recurring revenue, which are really, really critical to the success of an app. So where would you begin? Or if you had to pick 3, let's say, or 5, what would you recommend to people who are either just starting or people who are not sure how to do tracking to look at?
Well, know your customer acquisition cost, know your activation to trial ratio, and one of the most trial to subscription, activation to trial, everything in the funnel, basically, right? You talked about MRR, you talked about churn. And to me, the most important KPI is pulse. And if you haven't, I recommend all our audiences to read Amplitude's playbook, which is 140 pages, kind of like, basically it's the blueprint for retention. If you haven't, I figured out the link for it somewhere. Every single retention marketer need to read that book to know the definition and strategies for every single, but product pulse is basically the ratio of your gain over churn, right? Every product is a leaky bucket. At what ratio are you gaining? At what ratio are you losing? Are you going to fix those holes first before you actually turn on the tap? Or are you just going to constantly do it in a way that your product economic is healthy? I think it's really important to measure your product pulse ongoing. You have that KPI in place.
We will find this link and we will put it also in the description. So yet another link to make the description more exciting.
Yeah.
But interesting. So beyond that, what else would you look at? You mentioned leaky bucket, and it's funny because I wrote a guide on churn last year, and churn is basically this leaky bucket. And for those of you who don't know what a leaky bucket is, if you think about a bucket and you pour water into it, eventually it'll flow out, or if there's a hole in it, it will come out. At what rate
Yeah.
is this leak going to continue? And this leak is you're working so hard on maybe your App Store optimization or your paid user acquisition or optimization once they hit the app, but then they churn, meaning they leave, they cancel the subscription. And that's the problem, because you may work really hard on getting them in, but you're not really caring about when they leave. And you don't know that so many are leaving that at some point you will just end up with no paying subscribers or less than what you're bringing in. That's negative churn. So churn is one of those things that I think are so critically important. Apple doesn't calculate that for you. Google doesn't calculate that for you. I'm not entirely sure why. I think they probably should, and maybe they'll introduce that in the future, but we do that for you automatically on our platform. And it's probably one of the most, I wouldn't say most useful metrics, but it's a very useful metric to understand the lifeline. What other metrics would you look at other than revenue, of course?
Well, we talked about, I mean, one of the things that I would look at is the retention curves. So every retention basically graph, it looks like this. So there are strategies to flatten that or like delay that, because as you know, we talked about, we use like, users over times, right? Average revenue per user is really important, right? MRR is important for subscription apps, right? But revenue per paying user compared to revenue per user. So the ones that are paying, are they actually, how many percent? Like for games, I know 5% of like payers, they actually pay a lot of money, right? So how are those champions users for you?
Yeah.
Can you actually get them to, if you have a game, to events, to, like to leaderboards, and incentivize them to kind of like play more and give them gems, tokens, whatever they need to kind of like get them hooked. So, and who are the users that they're leaving or they've left, and what are your strategies for resurrection, right? That's another strategy.
Yep.
Are you sending them email, win back emails, retargeting them on internet or on social to get them back? Because once they used to pay for your product, why can't they pay in the future? What has changed? Yep. Do you know what was the price reason? So all those things are, I think, KPIs I will look at, or usage patterns I will look at.
This is exactly what I would recommend. You have to look at how much money you're making, but not revenue that comes in from just the subscribers as of when they pay it, but on a monthly rolling window, which is exactly what monthly recurring revenue or MRR is, because you want to understand those subscription patterns, those paying users. And those are all metrics that we have in our platform, and we highlight on our platform specifically because there are, I want to say 30 plus metrics at this point that we track for subscriptions. And most of them are only useful when you're trying to optimize for one very specific thing. But as a whole, you really want to know how much money people are paying you ongoing. You want to know how many people are paying you and how many people are in trial, because I think it's safe to say that if you don't have a trial now, for the most part, you're probably leaving money on the table or sending traffic to a competitor because they are offering something for free. There's always the question of abuse with trials, and I think the abuse is worth it, if you ask me. Now, we're running out of time. I think we have 5 more minutes. So to kind of wrap it all up, what tips would you give someone who's transitioning to this new model, or someone who has this but maybe is not spending enough time optimizing it? How can they go about making more money with subscriptions?
Measure everything in the funnel. Basically, peel off the onion to different layers. We talked about different things in the funnel, from the time they download your app, before, like, the App Store view, to download, the issue, the retention, to pass the critical event of your app. What is it? Is it the key event completed? Is it a meditation app, the first meditation session? Is a social app, friends added, right? So watch out for those signals. And then day 1, day 7, day 14, look where is actually, like, where are you dropping people and what efforts you need to put there first, and then if you have a chance to put a subscription in front of users, I've talked to lots of people, and I think it was a long time in a conference, I met this head of user acquisition in common. I'm like, do you guys put prices in front of them right away. They're like, yeah, if you have a chance, if you actually bought it to your brand, if you have a good value prop and app store optimization, and they come in, then try to get them to subscribe right away. And time sensitive matters, like like various offers, pricing A, B, C, preferred. Be smart with your the UX design. Sometimes when you see those like pop-ups, you can't even find the X color. There's like white and blue or some contrast, and what chances some people buy or subscribe because they can. Trust me, not every user is like, we are in the app marketing community. There's like developer. There are people out there that they're busy, but they actually have the need for your product, and don't be shy to actually put it in front of them with a very smart kind of marketing approach. And obviously marketing can sell, right? And measure everything, but get the right tools in place. Measure everything, like app figures, good partner, like get things in place, and try to like look at everything that you have blind sight and you're just assuming. Come up with a lot of hypotheses. Join the mobile community, that you see other people's hypotheses. A lot of people kind of prove it right or wrong. Don't try to reinvent the wheel if that exists already.
Agreed. Anything that you can learn from someone else's experience, you should bring into your own. But to your point, thinking about the entire funnel is a great way to think about it, because it's not one specific area that will allow you to optimize. It's really the whole thing. If you're starting with something that is only good on one side, maybe it's the App Store optimization, but not the pay screen, or maybe it's the pay screen, but not the App Store optimization, you're really losing a lot of conversion percentage if you think about it that way, because you start with a big number and it becomes smaller as you go down. So I would tend to agree with this. And I think that's really all the time we have. But just to close this up, there was a follow-up in the chat about the $75 in-app purchase. And the $75 in-app purchase is seemingly for a CRM, I believe. And
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's a business tool, and it's competing with a $10 a month base tier for competitors. So I was really saying that people like the one-time purchase of $75 versus the $10 a month. And that's a fallacy that I see all the time. People will like paying less. That's just the nature, I think, of humans. But it doesn't mean that it's good for your business. So as we said in the beginning, as you said in the beginning, you really have to know your economics, and you have to know what's sustainable to you, because just because people like it, they like it now, but what if you go out of business in a year? Are they still going to like it? No, then they will complain. We paid you all this money and you weren't able to give us service. We would have paid a little bit more and we would have gotten more service. So I think about what you need to do, and that's how you price your in-app purchase, your subscription. Would you say that's true?
100%. It's something that, especially like you talked about CRM business, I'm right now evaluating switching away from HubSpot or staying HubSpot, or, there's a lot of little things that goes to that decision for people, and you never know what's important for someone. Don't ever assume the most important reason people need to leave your product or stay in your product is what? Because they have specific needs. It's unique to them, right? So just, if you can ask questions from them, they'll tell you. Trust me, your users will tell you.
Oh yeah, I know that for a fact. I do that all the time. Great. So that's all the time we have. I know we didn't get to some of the questions, but if you still want them answered, drop them in the comments below, and we will do our best to get back to them. I will look at this a little bit later, and for it too. Thank you for joining us. This was great. I always, when I invite guests, I don't know how deep we're going to get into topics, and I just let the conversation kind of do its own thing. And this was so much fun. I think we can talk for at least 2 more hours if we really wanted to. So maybe we'll have to do this again in the future. But again, thank you for coming, and thanks to everyone who joined us and asked questions. And again, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments and we'll get back to them. Happy Thursday to everyone.
Happy Thursday. Thanks, Ariel.
Thank you.
Ciao.